because Tim Bray, our next guest, was covering the U.S. Open for NBC Sports. We bring Tim on today because he is also the Clemson radio analyst for basketball and football. And we want to continue Brian's series of 12 games in 12 weeks, talk a little Clemson football. But let's start with a little golf, Tim, because I'm also a huge golf guy, and it had to be a blast just to be at that U.S. Open. Pretty thrilling finish with J.J. Spaun. How cool is it to see that one go down at Oakmont last week?
Yeah, it was, Tim. And before I start, do you know what the name of that song is?
Round Ball Rock, right?
Round Ball Rock.
Yeah,
very good by John Tesh. Yeah. And like you, I'm really looking forward to hearing that song back on NBC with basketball next year. That's gonna be fun. But yeah, the U.S. Open was really amazing. You know, I sit in the 18th tower with the announcers, and I'm one of their stats guys. And after the round Friday, it was kind of like they weren't exactly enamored with everything that was going on, because I think they looked to have the major players be involved. And after two rounds, the top 10 players in the world were a combined 70 over par.
Right.
But then things really got interesting on the weekend, and especially Sunday, when late in the day we had five guys tied for the lead at one point, and then just a thrilling ending by J.J. Spaun, who one of the stats I looked up during my time in the tower was that he had not made a putt over 35 feet all year, and then he made a 44-footer on the 12th hole and a 64-footer on the last hole. So he had made a putt over 35 feet all year, and then makes two of them in the last 7 holes of the final round of the U.S. Open to win. That was pretty amazing.
Yeah, another great stat they had right away, the NBC team, was that was the longest putt of the entire championship, the one he made on 18, right? 64 feet, I think it was.
Right. That was actually one of the things that I worked on. I just happened to be browsing the list of the longest putts made, and I saw 59 feet 2 inches was the previous longest putt by anybody. And another one of our guys looked up the fact that he was the first U.S. Open champion to shoot 40 on the front line and the front 9 in the back on the last round since 1913, when Francis Ouimet, the amateur, shot over 40 and still won.
Yeah, that was another great stat. That's got to be really a fun gig when you're coming down the stretch in the back 9. I guess this was a championship that probably would have been pretty tough to prep some stats, because there were so many guys there in the last hour of the tournament that could have realistically won the thing. I mean, it got really jammed up after the rain delay.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Although we did have some time in the rain delay to do some digging, and it was a little bit more finite than you have going into the round as far as who's going to be involved. But yeah, it is kind of a great challenge, especially in golf, and especially on that course, because somebody can make a double or a triple, and the leaderboard really changes a lot. The rough, I've worked a lot of golf tournaments for NBC, and that was the longest rough and thickest rough. It's one thing to have a long rough, but it was also so thick that it really had an impact.
Yeah, for my money, that's the toughest course in the country. I mean, toughest course in the world, maybe, Oakmont, considering how much it doesn't really change, too, when it's member play versus a U.S. Open. It seems like the members really embrace the idea of, yeah, we want it to be tough and we want the greens to be really fast, and it's always fun to see a U.S. Open at Oakmont for sure, and that one definitely lived up to the hype. So Tim Bray is with us, who is the Clemson radio analyst for football and basketball. And let's dive into Clemson a little bit, Tim. Always fun when Clemson is on the schedule. I say that it's always a tough game for Syracuse, but there's been some great games in the Syracuse-Clemson recent memory, and they've seemed to play up to the challenge in recent memory. What do you make as we sit here in June, middle of June, of what Clemson is going to have on the football side of things this year? It seems like it's going to be one of their better teams in a little bit.
Yeah, I would think so. And before I dive into Clemson, certainly, Syracuse had a terrific year last year, and I think it's going to be a game with a lot of national attention. And you're right about the series. Of course, Syracuse with the big upset against Clemson in 2017. That was our only regular season loss. And then the very next year, here's something people don't realize, that, that was the game in 2018 at Clemson when Trevor Lawrence got hurt in the first half, and we had to put our third-string guy in, Chase Bryce, because Kelly Bryant had left the team that week because he wanted to save another year of eligibility. And so he had to hit a 4th and 13 pass to lead us to the touchdown drive that ended up winning the game. If Clemson had lost that game, we wouldn't have gotten to the ACC championship because we would have been tied with Syracuse with a 7-1 record. Syracuse would have gone to the ACC championship game and not Clemson, and Clemson probably wouldn't have gotten into the playoff. And you can look back and see, of course, that was Clemson ended up 15-0 and arguably the best team in Clemson history. But if Clemson doesn't beat Syracuse in that game, doesn't even get to the playoff, and doesn't win the national championship.
Yeah, that's a fork in the road moment that went well for you guys, and I'm sure a lot of Syracuse fans think back on that 4th down play. And the nature of that last drive, my memory of it is it was just a lot of ground and pound to get there besides that big 4th down play from Chase Bryce, which makes sense because they went to the third-string quarterback. But it was tough from a Syracuse standpoint to watch them just run it down their throats there in that big drive.
Yeah, well, we had a pretty good running back who did that. His name was Travis Etienne, and he was arguably one of the best players in the history of the ACC, and certainly our all-time leading rusher, who's gone on a little bit of an injury play career in the NFL. But, we had some outstanding players on that team. And I think Clemson's going to have a strong team again this year. We've got 16 starters back, 8 on offense, 8 on defense, and got a third-year starter at quarterback, and Cade Klubnik, who came on strong last year through 36 touchdown passes, 3rd in the country, 3,600 yards. So he's got some really good receiving core to throw to. The only real question for Clemson on offense is going to be the running back position because Moffa graduated, and then Haynes got hurt at the end of the year, who would be the starter coming into the year. So I'm not sure what his status is going to be when we start workout.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it seems like Dabo is going into the portal a little bit, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like he didn't fully embrace it right away, and maybe too much was made of kind of that whole conversation, because I think you can also look at it the way maybe he was, which was, you don't have to go into the portal if you've got a lot of great players out of the high school recruiting ranks and you're developing them. But what's your sense of kind of his overall view of the portal right now, and if that's changed at all in the last couple of years?
Well, you'd have to say it's changed a little bit because we got 3 guys in the portal in the off season. One, a defensive end named Helt from Purdue, looks like he's going to come in and be a starter from the get-go this fall. He had 56 tackles last year for Purdue, 10 tackles for loss. Obviously, Purdue was not a good program in terms of wins and losses, but I think individually Helt was a good player. Then we got a linebacker coming in from Alabama, and a receiver who came from a small school who had 139 yards receiving in the spring game, and now he's a guy who can catch some balls in traffic. We've got 4 receivers coming back who have had 500-yard seasons, so I think we've got really good depth at receiver. But yeah, I think Dabo's a little bit more of a willingness to use it. Obviously, we're only taking 3 is probably still one of the lower totals in the ACC. Last year, we were us and the service academies were the only schools that didn't take a transfer for the 2024 season. So I think he's a little bit more open to it, but he still wants the basis of the roster to be people he brings in as freshmen.
Tim Beret is with us, Clemson football radio analyst, as we preview the Week 4 matchup, middle of September, when the Orange will go down to Clemson and Death Valley for what should be an awesome early season matchup here. You hit on it a little bit, Tim, just your thoughts on kind of Syracuse from your guys' lens, but do you feel like the Clemson fan base, when they got their schedule and like every team is doing right now, they're going through all the games, do you feel like their antennas are up a little bit with that Syracuse game, considering what Fran Brown has done in his one season so far and considering kind of the history of the series between the two teams?
Well, yeah, 100%. You got to remember that all Clemson fans were paying great attention to that Syracuse-Miami game at the end of last year. And so when Syracuse, won that game, Clemson wouldn't gotten into the playoff if it hadn't been for that Syracuse victory. So obviously paying close attention to that game. I'm sure they all watched that game, all the Clemson fans, and were rooting like crazy for Syracuse. But they also saw how good Syracuse was. So, they're certainly going to be well aware, as does our players, that if Syracuse is capable of, the program overall beating Miami like they did, they're certainly going to be, well aware and excited about that game.
And I imagine that week one matchup, LSU, is a game that everyone is focused on right now, of course, and just as a state of the ACC against the SEC and all those conversations, I think that's going to be a really intriguing week one matchup. How much do you feel like that game can really maybe alter the season or just change how Clemson is viewed nationally, how they play in that week one game?
Yeah, 100%. It kind of reminds me of the season opener of 2013 when we faced Georgia, and we got a big win in that game, 38-35, and elevated us into the top five. We ended up losing to Florida State later on in that season, but that was certainly a game that was a stepping stone for the program, and this game is going to be certainly hyped. We're 10 weeks away, and I think usually things really get going when we have the summer press conferences in Charlotte in July. But yeah, certainly LSU is going to be a strong opponent, and the interest, I can just tell the team by the ticket demands. You get these emails about the IPTAY members about getting tickets for games, and all the tickets and promotions are like you can get tickets to every game but the LSU game, Everything is but the LSU game when there's a promotion here on the radio, and so the interest in that is going to be really sky high.
Yeah, that'll be an intriguing week one matchup. Before we let you go, Tim, any thoughts on the defense and maybe some names we should know defensively? You mentioned a lot of the guys offensively, and we know Cade Klubnik's back. We know the wide receiver group, like you said, is going to be very deep and talented. Who are the names we should know on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, actually, we've got 12 of our top 15 tacklers from last year returning. Probably two of the most prominent, well-known are P.J. Parker as a defensive end. He had 11 sacks last year, 19 tackles for loss. Peter Woods, who was in and out of the lineup because of injury, but he is a very strong defensive tackle. They kind of experimented him with defensive end last year. He's going to be back at defensive tackle, which is more his strong suit. And then we had a true freshman last year named Sammy Brown, who was very productive, averaged a tackle every 5 plays. Ended up with 75 tackles as a true freshman last year, only 4 away from leading us in that category. And then we got a defensive back named Avion Terrell. His brother's a starter for the Atlanta Falcons, and he's certainly one of the best cornerbacks in the country. So I think we've got a pretty strong defense and some star players at each level of the defense.
Yep, sounds like another Clemson team. A lot of talent up and down the roster. Definitely will be an exciting game for both teams once they square off week 4 of the season down in Death Valley. And Tim, we appreciate you hopping on. Hopefully we'll get you on closer to the game and get more of a breakdown once the season gets rolling. But enjoy your summer down there, and thanks for hopping on with us.
That'd be great. Great to speak with you.
All right, that's Tim Beret, the Clemson radio analyst for football and basketball. Good to get his perspective on Clemson. Going to be fascinating when it's Fran Brown against Dabo Swinney for the first time after all of the comments that were made at the end of the Miami game, and Dabo Swinney kind of returning the favor during the ACC championship celebration as well, saying, shout out Fran Brown. So it seems like they have a good relationship, a lot of mutual respect, and it'll be interesting to see Fran's team go against Dabo for the first time, as Clemson will be, I think, definitely the favorite in the ACC once those polls come out and the season gets going. But that is our chat on Clemson, continuing our 12 games in 12-week series. So Brian will continue that series with Duke next week, and I'm sure have someone on to break down the Blue Devils. Let's hit a timeout here on ESPN Radio. You can hop on in the chat as well at qsportstalk.com, and we'll be back with a little bit of an update on the Boeheim's Army roster right after this here on ESPN Radio.